Don't say you've forgotten me. You remember me, don't you? You don't remember.
What's up, fam? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Luffy Webster, and today we are talking about legacy. When you think about legacy, what does that mean to you? Do you think about how you want to be remembered, or if you want to be remembered at all? Most of us, myself included, are 2 generations away from being forgotten completely. Erased, like we never existed in the first place. Do you know your great-grandparents' names? What about something they were passionate about? My great-grandma, I have very fond memories of her. I actually do remember her, but I couldn't tell you her name off the top of my head. The only things that I have of her are those couple of memories and actually her artichoke plants that are still fruiting in my grandma's backyard. If there's one thing that you remember about Solidus, remember that he wanted to be remembered. Unable to have kids of his own or to be cloned, Solidus is actually far closer to being forgotten than 2 generations, and with his rapid aging, he has far less time to figure out what kind of a legacy he wants to leave, let alone how to leave it. In this video, we're going to walk through Solidus' tragically short life and explore his character through the lens of legacy. Why does Solidus exist in the first place? Well, it comes down to Kojima needed another snake for MGS 2, and so Solidus is born. Obviously, gas would have normally come after liquid and solid, but gas snake sounds terrible. He would have been the joke of the entire franchise, so Kojima took mercy on him and named him Solidus instead. Solidus is a fitting name as it represents the boundary between solid and liquid in chemistry, and in MGS, Solidus is the most balanced clone of Big Boss, genetically speaking, sandwiching him between solid and liquid. While designing Solidus, Shinkawa tried to actually imagine what Solid Snake would look like in about 5 or 10 years as the 2 share a face. It's interesting that years down the line, when it came to design an actually older Snake, one of the inspirations for Old Snake was Lee Van Cleef, the inspiration for Revolver Ocelot's design. I don't think that came into play in MGS 2, but it's neat to think about that these 3 characters could be connected in that way.
Unlike an intron of history, I will be remembered as an exon. That will be my legacy, my mark in history.
Intron, a segment of DNA or RNA molecule which does not code for proteins and interrupts the sequence of genes. Exon, a segment of DNA or RNA molecule containing information coding for a protein or peptide sequence. Solidus was determined to add to history and not just be a part of it without making his mark on the world. Solidus was created by the Patriots with the sole purpose of becoming the next big boss as his perfect clone. As a failsafe, they designed him with the inability to have kids, be cloned, and with a mutation in his genes that caused him to age rapidly. If he were to turn against them or fall into enemy hands, they felt that this would assure them that his genetic material couldn't be used against them to turn out more super soldiers of Big Boss. In his younger years, Solidus spent his time commanding the small boy unit in Liberia, and already twisted up in the legacy he was meant to uphold and fulfill, he ended up killing the parents of a 6-year-old local boy and kidnapping him. He mirrored his own upbringing in Raiden with the intention of both better understanding himself and passing on all his knowledge and values as though Raiden were his son. He taught him everything he could and impressed upon him how much more honorable fighting with the sword was than a gun. That's right. We have Solidus to thank for MGR. Later in the early 2000s, the Patriots called Solidus to serve as the 43rd President of the United States, where he could leave a mark on American history as George Sears. Solidus stood for nuclear disarmament and anti-eugenic policies. Towards the end of his term in 2005, he pushed negotiations with Russia to get them to agree to lower their nuclear stockpiles and get compliant with the ABM Treaty via the START III Treaty. He knew that if he could pull this off, it'd go down in the history books and would add to his legacy. Throughout his career as president, Solidus came to resent his role as puppet to the Patriots. In MGS 2, we learned that President Johnson, Solidus' successor, was just as much of a puppet to the Patriots as Solidus was and hated it just as much. Concerned with what kind of legacy he'd be able to leave behind while under the thumb of the Patriots, he joined forces with Solidus with the goal of breaking free of his role as their pawn in the hopes of eventually being able to join them. President Johnson's open explanation of his own reasonings behind his drive to conspire against the Patriots lends us insight into how Solidus was likely feeling when he was in the presidential role himself. Also, rip to the Patriots. They got 2 people in there, one right after the other, and both of them betrayed them. President Johnson openly talks about getting upgraded to a queen from a pawn when he agreed to act as their figurehead of the United States, and laments that it was only after he was acting in that role that he began to question the kind of legacy he'd leave behind. Solidus, similarly, wanted to break out of his role as a playing piece on the Patriots chessboard. He orchestrated the Shadow Moses incident in MGS1 as a way to arm himself with a metal gear and a nuclear warhead to use against the Patriots. Unfortunately, his plans were dashed by Solid Snake when he destroyed Metal Gear. When the Patriots learned of Solidus' attempted betrayal, they removed him from office and peddled a cover-up story that instead said he'd resigned. They planned to dispose of him, but Solidus anticipated this and went into hiding before they were able to get rid of him. Bitter that their Big Boss replacement didn't work out as they had wanted, the Patriots intended to erase all that they could of Solidus from the history books. All Solidus has to show for the rough life he's led is his accomplishments, and taking these away from him so that he has nothing and is no one was unacceptable to him. Instead of standing by and letting his history of accomplishments be erased, Solidus decided to erase the Patriots instead, to protect his legacy. Like MGS1, Solidus orchestrates the events of MGS2, though this time he steps in to play a more dominant role. His goal is to get his hands on a list of the Patriots, which is hidden inside one of their AI systems, GW. This doesn't quite pan out as he'd hoped, as Solid Snake once again gets in the way, and so Solidus is left with his last lead on the Patriots, a list of their names hidden within the nanomachines of his pseudo-son, Raiden. Unfortunately, this means he'll need to kill Raiden in order to extract the info from his nanos, wiping out his only living legacy. After an intense sword fight, Solidus is defeated and chooses to throw himself off of the side of the federal building they're fighting on rather than be cut down. He dies reaching towards a statue of George Washington, a man whose legacy is unavoidable here in America. President Johnson told Raiden that when he expressed his desire to join the Patriots that Solidus had scoffed and told him that pawns can't become players. Unknowingly, Solidus was speaking to his own situation as well. As a pawn of the Patriots, they used and threw him out as they pleased. He fought in Liberia for them, served as the President of the United States as their puppet leader, and finally, also unknowingly, orchestrated the events of MGS2 to their liking so that they could test their S3 plan. Beyond MGS2, Solidus is reduced to a joke as his corpse is used as a tool to suit Big Boss's needs. Parts of his body are salvaged to reconstruct Big Boss's, and there's no mention of what drives him, who he was beyond a prop for MGS4's plot. His legacy is lost. Think about your accomplishments for a moment. What is something that you're proud of? Now, how would you feel if someone told you that they were going to erase all of that? Solidus suffers from villain voice, and it paints all of his actions in an over-the-top, cartoony light, but he was really only trying to protect himself and his legacy. Used from the beginning to try and fill a role he never asked for, and when he strayed from the path, he was snuffed out like a bug.
All I want is to be remembered by other people, by history.
Remember Solidus. Remember that he thinks swords are neater than
45, huh? The feeding ramp is polished to a mirror sheen.